Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Benjamin, and welcome to my Endhall Postmortem video. So let's start off. What is Endhall? Endhall is a bite-sized roguelike. It's a very small game, similar to like Into the Breach in the way that you play it, but quite a bit smaller in scope. So first, let's talk about numbers. The game released in December after the first month of revenue, gross revenue on Steam and itch.io. I had predicted that I would make about $1,500 and I ended up making about $2,500 in the first month. So that was a little bit higher than I had predicted. I didn't predict that the game would do super well, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But it did a little bit better than I initially thought it would, and so that was a nice little surprise for me. Since then, the game has done probably worse than I would have imagined. It's had more of a drop-off in revenue than I thought it would have. I knew it would have a drop-off, but lifetime sales revenue on Steam, the gross, is now at $4,800, so $4,800 US dollars. After you take out Steam and VAT taxes and stuff like that, it ends up being about $4,100. On itch.io, the gross revenue is only about $730. So you can see there's a significant difference in revenue between Steam and itch.io. I love itch.io. It's a great platform. I highly recommend using it and trying to support indies that use that platform, but Steam is still very, very dominant when it comes to releasing indie games. And I don't know what my itch.io numbers would look like if I had released solely on itch.io. Maybe they would be, I'm sure they would be significantly higher, but how would they compare with the Steam numbers? I'll never know, I guess. So overall, I was pretty happy with it. I think that puts me at like the total gross revenue since the game has been released somewhere around $5,600, I think, since the game has released. Was this game a success? And that depends on how you define success, obviously. Revenue-wise, it was not. The game took me about a year of part-time development. I estimate that it would have taken me about 3 months of full-time development, but it's hard to say. I put a lot of time into this game, and a gross revenue of under $6,000 is not worth the amount of time that I put into it. And that's okay. I knew when I was making the game, when I was releasing the game, that it wasn't going to do super, super well. And so I was okay with that going into it. I would say that it wasn't a success in that sense. Reviews on itch.io, I've got a 4.8, I think. 4.8 star review. I don't remember how many reviews. It's not that many, like 30, well, like 15 or something. I don't remember. I guess I could check here real quick. So 17, and I'm 4.9 star reviews on itch.io and 17. I think that's partially because itch.io has so many less sales, and also because itch.io is more focused on indies, so people are, I would say, a little bit more forgiving of your game on itch.io and its flaws. They'll look at the positives of your game and kind of, I wouldn't say ignore the flaws of the game, but they're more forgiving of your flaws, I think. That's my guess, though, that my reviews on itch.io are better because of those two reasons. People are more indie, they're more indie, and so they're a little bit more forgiving, and also there's less sales on itch.io. So Steam reviews are, last I checked, it was about 82% positive, which I was pretty happy with. The main negative feedback or criticism that the game has received is that it is too short. I actually kind of disagree with that. We'll talk about that a little bit more later in this video, but I think people felt like it was too short, but that wasn't the main problem with the game. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. The game is advertised as being very short, so people playing the game are going to know going into it that it's a short game. And it's also priced at only $3 right now, and so it's not priced very high either. So that is the main criticism, though, on Steam, is that it's too short. So I guess review-wise, I would say that it was a success. It received majority positive reviews. People seem to like it. I would say, yeah, it was a success. I want to do better next time, but it was good for a first game. My main goal with this game was to learn how to release on Steam and kind of learn the process of releasing a game and try and just, I needed to release a game in order to learn how to better release games. You're never going to nail it on your first try, or if you do, then you're extremely lucky. Most people do not nail it on their first try. Most people have to try multiple times before they start to see some success. And so I knew that I would need to start making attempts in order to become successful as an indie game developer. And that was my main goal with making this game. And I learned a lot through the process, and I can say that in that regard, since that was my main goal with the game was successful to me. So let's talk about some of the things that I learned with this game. And these are going to be they're not really categorized. There's going to be some gameplay stuff, there's going to be some marketing stuff, just kind of my thoughts along the way. Stuff that I learned. The first thing that I had to solve with the game was fixing defensive gameplay. It's a strategy game. You move a little character around on a board, kind of like chess. You use these spells to move around. Early playtesters quickly discovered that defensive play was really good in the game. You could just run away from everything and then hit and run, basically, play style. And it didn't encourage players to take risks, and it was really boring and people didn't like it. And so that was the first thing that I had to fix with the game. And so what I decided to do was incorporate a health system that would reduce every single turn. And so the main character is an artificial intelligence, but he has kind of like an android robot representation. You have an energy level, and that's your health, and each turn your energy level goes down. And when you kill enemies, it actually brings your energy level back up. So it encourages an aggressive play style, and that seemed to fix the issues that I was having with that. One of the other things that I discovered was making ranged attacks, giving everything basically a shorter range, because the board that the player was playing on was very small, and so having moves with a very large range made them really good. And so I kind of reduced the range on a lot of things. And there's still some actions that have a large range that can reach very far, but I toned down a lot of them. And that seemed to help as well. The next thing I learned was something that I've been calling macro versus micro decisions. And I just made up those terms. Somebody else might have a better way of defining this. In a sense, a macro level decision is a decision that is fairly permanent, and once you make it, it will affect the way you play the game, the rest of the game. So for example, let's say you're playing an RPG and there's a skill tree. A macro level decision would be choosing to go down a specific skill tree path that would prevent you from going down a different path. It's a permanent decision that affects the way that you play the entire rest of the game. Right? A macro level decision is a small choice that you make that can be easily, if something goes wrong, it can be easily fixed later, and doesn't really affect the way you play the rest of the game. It just affects that one turn. So you could be fighting an enemy. Which attack do you use on that enemy? Do you cast a fireball or do you use your sword? It doesn't really affect the way the game plays for later on. And if you do less damage because of it, you can switch or change tactics, and it doesn't really matter. There's very small consequences to that kind of action. A lot of the reviews, like I talked about earlier, complained about the game being small. But I think the more that I've thought of it, and I really appreciate that feedback. I'm not trying to negate their feedback, because that helped me. Their feedback helped me to come to this conclusion. But I'd been thinking about it quite a bit, and I think the biggest problem was the game had a low replay value. The reason it did was because there were no macro level decisions. Basically, all the decisions you make are fairly micro level decisions, and they don't affect the game long term. There are some really interesting micro level decisions. That's one of the things the game does really well. The choices that you make each turn have immediate consequences and they're interesting puzzles. But there aren't really any macro level decisions. The main macro level decision is which new skill do you add to your arsenal of skills after each turn. But because there aren't tons of those, and because there aren't tons of them, by the end of the game you usually end up with a similar set of skills anyways. And so it really didn't matter. It was just kind of the order you picked them in. You'd end up with them all anyways by the end. That made the game shorter in a sense than it should have been, because if you look at games like Slay the Spire, for example, Slay the Spire only takes about 40 minutes, 45 minutes for your average Slay the Spire run. So you start the game, you finish it 40, 45 minutes later, and it's a $15 game. However, there are a lot of really interesting macro level decisions in Slay the Spire. Which card you add to your deck is like a very important decision every time you get that choice. And so every time you play the game, it's completely different, and it encourages a lot of replay. It encourages you to replay it, and you end up with a lot of hours put into a game that really only takes about 45 minutes to beat. And that was my goal with Endhall, was to make a small game that had high replay value, but I kind of failed to achieve that goal. It's still a good game, people enjoy it, but you're probably only going to play it once or twice. If you beat it, you'll probably just be done there. So another thing that I noticed with Endhall is that the game is very similar to in feel similar to Into the Breach. Obviously there are a lot of differences between the two games, but it's been compared to Into the Breach, so there's obviously some similarities there. I started working on Endhall before Into the Breach was released and before I even knew about Into the Breach. However, as I was working on the game and Into the Breach came out, I actually ended up playing Into the Breach, beating it a few times, and enjoyed the game, and it definitely influenced some of the decisions that I made while working on Endhall afterwards. And the games are different in the way that they play. Into the Breach, you manage multiple units, and you have a grid power level. It's more of a defensive type game where you're trying to defend these buildings, where Endhall is just you have one unit, you have your health, and you're trying to figure out how to kill as many enemies in each turn while keeping yourself safe. So they're definitely different in that way, but the kind of chessboard tactics genre, they're similar in that way, and people kind of notice that. They're like, oh, this is like a smaller Into the Breach. It has Into the Breach vibes, and I think that was a good thing, because Into the Breach is a really great game, but I don't think Endhall did enough. It didn't bring enough new stuff to the genre to make it worth it. And that's something that I learned about while I was working on Endhall, but decided to finish the game anyways, because it's important, I think, to learn how to finish games and not just, I mean, it's really easy to fall into the trap of, oh, this game's not as good as I thought it was going to be, so I'm just going to start a new project because the new idea I have is much better, right? And everybody kind of has experienced that, I think, a lot of indie devs, and so I didn't want that to happen. I wanted to finish the game anyways, but I feel like I learned my lesson there, where when I make something new, when I make a new game, I want to bring something new to the genre, something that makes it unique a little bit, and I can use that while marketing the game and also when designing the game. You can have kind of like a core hook for your game that you design the game around. You design, whether it's a mechanic or whatever it is, a genre mashup or whatever, you want to have that and focus on that while you're building the game and while you're marketing the game. So I didn't do a lot of marketing for Endhall, actually. I released my YouTube videos, so my subscribers, you all saw it. I sent it to one YouTuber who ended up playing the game and seemed to enjoy it, but he played it probably 3 months after the game was released. That might be something interesting to keep in mind, that it might be good to send out builds of the game in advance. I also feel like one of the biggest mistakes that I made was that not very many people even really knew that I was working on the game. Even on my YouTube channel, I talked about it a little bit, but it was only, the couple months before releasing the game. And I think it's important to create an online presence for your game as soon as you start working on it in some form, and start building up anticipation for the release of the game. It's a tricky balance, and there's a bunch of other marketing videos on YouTube that you could watch that would probably do a better job of explaining it to you, but I feel like I didn't do that very well. And so when I released the game, it surprised a lot of people. All in all, I'm very proud of the game that I made, and I enjoyed the process a lot. It was a lot of fun to work on it. And I actually sometimes wish I could spend more time working on it, but due to how much money the game ended up making, it just wasn't really viable for me to continue working on it. And also, since it didn't really bring anything new to the table, adding more time into it was probably not going to bring in a lot more revenue. And so I was forced to just call it good with the 1.0 release. I'll obviously make sure to fix any bugs, but at the moment I'm not planning on adding any more content to the game, just supporting the current player base and the game itself. And which on a side note, I did have some very helpful beta testers for the game, and the game seems to be relatively bug-free, which in fact very, very few bugs, which I was very happy about, because I had some stuff on launch day where for a little bit I thought I wasn't going to be able to launch because of an issue that I ran into. But I was able to figure that out and get it all out there and working. It was also probably one of the more complicated games that I've ever made. Turn-based tactics with A-star pathfinding and stuff, and all inside of a new engine that I was learning. I was very happy with how everything kind of turned out, actually, because it was a brand new experience for me. But I did really enjoy it, and all in all, I'd say making Endhall was very worth it to me. Even if it wasn't financially worth it, all the other aspects of it, all the things that I learned, was a really good experience. And I would recommend that if you want to be an indie game developer, if you're working on your own projects, don't be afraid to make something small and release it. Even if you don't release it on Steam, even if you just release it on itch.io, I think that's a really important process you need to learn. And if you like to play indie games, I would suggest trying to find other people's small games and give them feedback on it and try and help them learn and grow as indie game developers, because none of us start off perfect. We're all learning, and it's a process, and in order to do that you have to kind of put yourself out there and take risks. And I feel like that's what I did with Endhall. I took some risks with the game and learned a lot from those risks that I took, and I'm really excited to start working on my next projects. So thank you all so much for watching this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. I don't remember if I briefly just mentioned this, but I did make Endhall in the Godot game engine, and I'm currently working on a course for Godot, so I'll probably have more information about that coming soon to my YouTube channel, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you all so much for the support. I hope this video was helpful to you and you learned something. If any of you have any questions about Endhall, anything at all, I want to be 100% transparent with the game and how things went. So feel free to ask in the comments. I'll answer as many questions as I possibly can. Thank you for watching the video, and I will talk to you all later.